Tonight, we drift back, very slowly, to a world lit by oil lamps and moonlight, a world of bells and markets, cloisters and barns, harbours and quiet fields. A whisper is travelling across the earth, a rumour borne on hooves and wheels and sails, a breath that moves from steppe to city, from caravan to caravanserai, from ship to shore. Before anyone can give it a name, before anyone can understand what it is, lives begin to change. You're safe here, warm and at rest. Breathe in and breathe out. Let your shoulders soften. We will take the long road together, calmly, gently, through the rise, the spread, the memory, and the legacy of the Black Death. In the middle of the 1300s, the known world was connected like never before. Across the vast grasslands of Central Asia, riders followed ancient paths. Along river valleys, merchants loaded bales of silk and bolts of wool. In the deserts, caravans stepped from oasis to oasis, guided by stars. On the seas, galleys and round-bellied cogs creaked over swells. From the Black Sea to the Mediterranean to the Atlantic coasts, empires had fought and traded and signed treaties. And so the routes felt open, busy, alive. The weather had cooled a little in the decades before. Harvests faltered in places. Famine visited some regions. And people were moving, adjusting, searching for steadier ground. Somewhere along these living routes, perhaps in the borderlands between steppe and mountain, a small organism found a perfect home. It did not think or plan or scheme. It only lived and multiplied inside the bodies of fleas and the blood of small mammals. This silent passenger thrived. When fleas took a new meal, the passenger jumped to a new host. People would later give it a name. Yersinia pestis, a bacterium. But in those years, there were no microscopes, no germ theory, no laboratory light. There were only symptoms and fear and the search for meaning. If your eyes feel heavy, let them. You can listen while resting and rest while listening. Physicians of the age wrote in careful, steady script about what they saw. A sudden fever, a crushing headache, a terrible weakness, swellings in the groin, the armpit, the neck, tender, hot, and dark, the buboes that would give one form of the illness its name. Sometimes, blackened spots appeared on the skin as blood vessels leaked and failed. In some places, the sickness moved with frightening speed from breath to breath, attacking the lungs, a coughing plague that could pass between people in a room. At other times, it flooded the blood, and the end came quickly, in hours, before dawn could arrive. Scholars today describe three phases of the same affliction: bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic. But in the 1300s, names were softer and sadder. People spoke of the great mortality. Later generations would call it the Black Death. There is a harbour on the northern edge of the Black Sea, a place of stone walls and wooden piers, where merchants once loaded grain and furs. Stories tell of a siege there, of desperate soldiers, of ships putting out to sea. Whether those stories are exact or only partially true, the feeling is the same. Ships leaving under pressure, sailors ill at their oars, rats slipping along ropes in the night. From those waters, vessels found the ports of the Mediterranean. In the autumn of 1347, docks heard new sounds, not only the calls of stevedores, but the murmurs of fear. A city would see fevers, then another, then another. Messina, Marseille, Genoa, Pisa, Venice. The names passed by like buoys on a darkened sea. The following year, 1348, the wave washed further inland, along the Rhône to Avignon, across France and Aragon, into Castile and Portugal, up the valleys of the Alps, into the German towns by river and road. The illness did not move evenly, nor predictably. It leapt, paused, flashed, and faded, then rose again in a nearby village, in England and Wales. It came by sea to the south and west, then climbed the roads to London and beyond, to the Midlands, to the north, to the borders of Scotland, to the east and north. It reached the Hanseatic ports, the Baltic, the forests and fields of Scandinavia. Across the Mediterranean's southern shores, it entered the great cities of North Africa, and farther east, it touched the markets and mosques of the Mamluk world. Everywhere, it was the same and not the same, familiar in pattern, different in detail. Breathe in, slowly. Breathe out, slowly. You are not there. You are here, listening safely from afar. What did people do when the unknown arrived at their gate? They did what people always do. They tried with the knowledge they had. Some fled to country houses, to mountain hamlets, to islands and quieter streets. Some stayed to care for kin, to guard shops and tools, to tend to the sick and the dying. City councils posted orders, closing taverns for a time, moving markets into the open air, instructing cleaners to sweep filth away. Priests and monks wrote letters and prayers. Physicians mixed herbs and brewed theriac. Apothecaries weighed cinnamon and myrrh. Fires were kindled in chambers to cleanse the air. Windows were closed against a miasma that some believed drifted on the wind. Astrologers cast charts, looking to the conjunction of planets, searching for cosmic signs that might explain the earthly sorrow. A pope in one city of the Rhône was said to sit between two great fires for weeks, believing the smoke would purify the air. Whether each remedy helped a little or not at all, each action felt like a way to hold meaning in the storm. Not all responses were gentle. When fear is great, the human heart can look for someone to blame. In some towns, whisper became accusation, and accusation became violence. Strangers, minorities, the poor, the powerless, were sometimes blamed for a sickness no one yet understood. This too is part of the record, and it asks us, here in the quiet, to remember compassion, to remember caution, to remember how easily pain seeks a target when certainty cannot be found. If you are drifting, let yourself drift. Your breathing is an anchor, in and out, slow and easy. Chroniclers left us scenes in ink and ash. A Florentine writer pictured friends telling stories outside the city walls, trying to keep their spirits steady while the bells tolled within. In English parishes, clerks copied wills as quickly as hands could move, leaving sheep to daughters, tools to sons, and a few coins for the lighting of candles on winter nights. In the cities of the Nile, writers described the emptying of markets, the silence along the lanes at noon, the great cemeteries filling beyond their borders. In market towns, someone pulled a cart, the wheels clicking over cobbles. A hymn whispered into the cold air. The numbers are hard to hold, and they should be held softly. In some places, perhaps a third of the people were lost. In others, more. In others, less. The wave did not strike each village equally. A monastery might be emptied, while over the hill, a hamlet endured. On the coast, a port might suffer deeply, while a farm inland struggled but survived. The figures are estimates, the margins wide, the archives incomplete. What matters in the hush of this room is the human scale, the family scale, the single life and the single breath. What did this great sorrow leave behind? When the first wave passed, on the land, fields lay fallow, and then slowly green again. In the towns, shutters opened, markets crept back, coin clinked once more. There were fewer hands to harvest and to build, and so the price of labour rose in many places. Lords sought to hold their tenants with old rules. Kings posted statutes to fix wages. Councils debated what was fair. In some regions, the bonds of serfdom loosened over years. Opportunity widened for those who survived, while in other regions, power tightened its grip. It is never simple, never uniform, never the same from valley to valley. Families adjusted to new shapes. Daughters inherited where sons had died. A widow became the keeper of a workshop. A younger cousin took the plough. Girls and boys married earlier in some places, or later, as communities found their footing. Guilds welcomed new members. Crafts passed to fresh hands, and across Europe and the Mediterranean, art began to speak differently. Painters brushed skeletons who dance alongside nobles and peasants. The danse macabre, a reminder that life is precious and equal in the face of mortality. Stonecutters carved transy tombs, where the resting figure appears first as a person in fine robes, and beneath as a bare and quiet body. A double image that whispered, glory fades, love remains. Medicine changed slowly. There were no sudden cures, no lightning-bound discoveries, but experience gathered like dew. Some towns began to keep lists of sickness and to watch the gates. Ports asked for bills of health from ships, or held newcomers outside the walls for a set number of days. A time of waiting that would later be called quarantine. Islands near great harbours were set aside, simple shelters built, a breathing space between arrival and entry. Doctors wrote and argued and experimented within the limits of their time. They tried to separate what comforted the heart from what helped the body. They learned the value of clean air, of distance, of fresh water, of removing refuse from streets and yards. Little by little, a net of practice was woven, imperfect, but useful. The wave, however, did not come only once. After the first great passage in the late 1340s and early 1350s, the illness returned in cycles, sometimes sharp, sometimes more muted. It revisited cities and villages in later decades. And centuries. A second pandemic that ebbed and flowed through early modern times. A city on the Thames suffered terribly in the 1660s. A port on the French coast mourned in the 1720s. A mountain village chose to isolate itself for the sake of its neighbours. Between each sorrow, life rebuilt itself, again and again, with the stubborn patience people always find. If you need a softer pace, we can slow further now. In, 2, 3, and out. 2, 3. You are doing well. How did people make sense of it all? Some looked to the heavens, to unusual stars, to the passing of comets. Some looked to the earth, to the smells of swamps, to the rot of refuse. Some looked within and found in prayer a steadying hand. Pilgrims walked roads to shrines. Candles were lit in thousands and thousands of small rooms. Others feared and tried to bargain with fear by beating their own backs, forming processions that authorities sometimes forbade. Clergy and scholars wrote letters of counsel, trying to hold communities to compassion and away from blame. In Jewish communities, in Christian towns, in Muslim quarters, wise voices begged for mercy upon the stranger, the traveller, the one who looked or sounded different. Sometimes those voices prevailed, and sometimes they did not. The record asks us to remember both, and to choose the better way when fear visits our own age. Centuries later, the hidden cause would be seen. In the 1800s and 1900s, lenses and lab benches, stains and slides, revealed the world of the very small, the little rod-shaped bacterium. Yersinia pestis found a place in textbooks. Fleas and rodents were shown to be part of the chain. But the chain is complex and never perfectly simple. Human movement mattered, weather mattered, hunger and trade and war mattered. The illness that seemed like a single shadow was really a tapestry of threads, woven through nature and society together. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, another great wave of plague moved through parts of Asia and the wider world. Scientists and doctors learned more and faster. Ships were inspected, rats trapped, vaccines attempted. Antibiotics later found that could quiet the bacterium's work if given in time. Even now, small sparks of this old fire can appear in far places, in the quiet of high deserts or the edges of fields. But with knowledge and medicine, the sparks can be cooled. The story does not end in fear. It rests today in understanding and care. Let us walk slowly through a few rooms of that time and linger with gentleness. A street at dawn, shutters still closed, bread ovens warming, the sky turning from deep blue to grey. A mother pours water from a clay jar into a wooden bowl. A child sleeps on a pallet by the wall. Outside, a cart passes, iron rims ticking. A man lifts a bar from his stall and pauses, listening to a bell far away. He breathes once, twice, and opens the door. A cloister at noon. The bees loud in the courtyard herb garden. Rosemary and rue and mint. A monk scratches a measured line across a parchment margin, the ink shining wetly for a moment. Footsteps approach. A message waits. Steady hands receive it. The scribe closes his eyes and opens them and writes. A ship at dusk, lanterns along the rail, gulls resting on a silent boom. The master stands by the tiller. The mate coils a rope. A barrel knocks softly where it's wedged near the mast. Far astern, the city lights rise and fall with the swell. The sky holds the first star, clear and cold. A hillside at night. The grasses leaning in a little wind. Two figures sit wrapped in cloaks and say very little. They point, now and then, to the few constellations they know by name. They are thinking of the day behind them and the day to come. One stands and the other follows, and they walk back toward the village and the hearth. When we speak of the Black Death, we speak of loss, yes, but also of endurance. We speak of a world that changed and a world that continued, of grief and of renewal, of laws rewritten and songs remembered, of new guild members taking old tools in hand and learning the weight of them, of a candle lit for someone loved, and then another, and then another. We speak of the birth of practices that would grow into public health, the keeping of lists, the guarding of gates, the kindness of distance when illness moves. We speak of a new tenderness in some hearts, and a hardening in others, and the choice, always the choice, to be gentle. We speak of art that tells the truth softly, that every life is precious, and every hour is a gift, of poems that ask us to remember to be humble and brave and kind. If you are still awake, let your breathing carry you a little deeper now. If you are asleep, let these words settle like dust in a sunbeam, harmless and light. A traveller, years after the first wave, comes over a hill and sees his town again. He finds a street changed, a doorway painted, a name he does not hear spoken anymore. He stands by a wall in the late afternoon and lays his palm against the stone. The stone is warm. The wind is soft. He closes his eyes and says a name he remembers, and he gives thanks for the names he can still say. The bells ring for vespers, and a new loaf is cut. Children play where the road widens. A cat sits in a window and watches the dusk. Someone tells a story by the hearth about a long ago ancestor who came through the hard years and learned to make a new life. In the telling, there is sadness, but there is also bread and laughter and the rising warmth of the fire. We end where we began, with the whisper of the world as it was, and the world as it is. The pathways of the earth are still busy, still bright with movement and hope. We know more now, about the small and the hidden, about what helps and what harms. We can honour those who lived before us, by choosing patience, by practicing care, by keeping watch for one another. Let your jaw unclench, let your hands rest. Breathe in, slowly, and breathe out, slowly. The story will be here in the morning, if you wish to hear it again. For now, sleep, and sleep well. We can go on very gently, and let the circle widen. We will not touch what you have already set to voice. We will only add new rooms, new paths, new quiet scenes, to make the journey longer, slower, and twice as deep. In the years before the Great Wave, rains failed in some summers, and then fell too hard in others. Bread ran short in certain regions. Hunger pressed on doorways, and travellers knocked more often for work. The great roads felt the weight of wagon wheels. The sea lanes hummed with trade and rumour. Along the Silk Road, bolts of cloth moved east and west. Spices and paper and ideas passed from hand to hand. In caravanserais, tea steamed in low bowls. Figures bent over ledgers by lamplight. In such a woven world, a small, hidden life could find many chances to ride. From fur to sack. From sack to ship. From ship to shore. Rats, quick and quiet, loved cordage and grain. Fleas, light as dust motes, loved warmth and blood. We do not need to see them closely here. We can keep our gaze soft. It is enough to know that in close quarters, on wood and rope and cloth, the chain could hold, and in a crowded lane or a shuttered room, breath could be a bridge. If you feel your breath becoming shallow, let's slow it together. In and out. In and out. You are safe, and you are doing beautifully. Travel with me to the Rhone, to a city of bridges and poplar leaves. Letters went out from there, sprigged with wax, asking for counsel and offering comfort. 2 great fires were kept burning near a desk of papers, not out of fear, only out of hope. A simple faith that warmth might ease the air. At the edges of the river meadows, shepherds still brought their flocks to drink, and children still skipped stones as the bell tolled the hour. Life continued in ripples, even as sorrow circled. Across the water to the Italian lagoons, timbers staked a city to the shallows. Gondolas rocked against posts, salt dried on stone steps. Here, officials began to write careful lists of ships, of crews, of cargoes, of fevers. At first it was 30 days. A Trentino to wait outside the city's channels. Then 40. A Quarantino. And from that number, a word would travel far into the future. On little islands near the harbour mouth, simple shelters rose, beds set apart. Clean air passing through shutters, back out to the sea. It was not perfect, but it helped. Helping a little, again and again, can become a great help in time. In a Tuscan room, a clerk copied the opening lines of a new tale. Outside the walls, a group of friends told stories to one another, to keep fear at the gate, to make a circle of light against the dark. Laughter returned in small sips. The ink dried, the book closed, and someone slept, at last, with a page beneath their cheek. In London, the river carried barges under grey skies. On Cheapside, stalls creaked open, and the smell of apples moved in the air. Some streets fell silent for a time, and then found their voices again. Parish lists filled in neat hands. Names of the living, names of the dead. Names of those who had gone to kin in the countryside. Names of those who had come down from the hills to start anew. From steeples, the bells marked matins and compline. Time continuing to be time, steady as rain on slate. In Cairo, where the Nile turned the fields green, writers set down what they saw with measured care. Markets thinned, then grew again. Water carriers called their routes. Bakers lifted warm bread with long wooden paddles. A scholar looked up from his page at the light falling through lattice work, and thought of parents loved and lost, then lowered his eyes and kept writing, because this too was a way to honour them. If you are drifting, It is all right to drift. If you are awake, rest your tongue against your teeth. Soften your brow. Let the words arrive, like tide over sand. The first wave passed, but the sea remembers the moon. Years later, the water rose again. A city on the Adriatic counted days. A port on the Channel closed its gates when the wind turned. A mountain village posted a watch at the boundary stone. The pattern became a braid, thick and thin strands, some years quiet, some years heavy. In the 17th century, a small village in the Green Hills chose a hard kindness. They set stones to mark a ring around their home. They left coins in vinegar in hollows filled with rain. They asked travelers to pass by, and they endured the months together, so that others outside the ring would be spared. The choice cost dearly, and yet it shone. In a great French port 2 centuries after the first sorrow, a ship from far horizons sought entry. Officials hesitated. Goods promised wealth. Rumors promised risk. The ship anchored at an island, and still the illness whispered into town. Black flags climbed the masts of lazaret buildings. Guards paced slowly in the heat. Clerks blinked at the brightness off white walls and water. The city mourned, rebuilt, and wrote new rules with a finer pen. Work changed, and with it, dignity found new doors to enter. On manors, there were fewer hands for harvest, and those hands were worth more. Wages pressed upward like grass through cobbles. Some rulers tried to bind the wind with laws, to nail prices in place, to fix feet to fields. But the wind is patient and strong. Over years, some bonds loosened, and people stepped into different lives. In towns, guilds looked about their halls and saw spaces on the benches. They took new apprentices, opened books to new names, trusted talent in new faces. Women who had kept shops with husbands now kept them alone and did well. Daughters took tools from drawers and found the heft of them good in the hand. A widow signed for a barrel of dye, weighed it and nodded. A child learned figures by candlelight, and one day balanced a ledger with a satisfied breath. Art met mortality with honesty and with tenderness. In frescoes on church walls, kings and millers, brides and brothers, all walked hand in hand with a smiling skeleton. The dance of death that asked for humility and offered perspective. But alongside the bones, there were lilies and bread, wedding garlands and sunlit windows. The message was not despair, it was attention. Notice the hour. Notice the face across from you. Notice the bowl of soup that warms your hands. Stone carvers made tombs that told the truth with 2 faces. Above, a resting figure, cloaked and calm. Below, the same figure, quiet in the stillness of what comes to all. It was not a horror, but a reminder to live well, to love well, to keep one's word, to give alms, to forgive. Charnel houses gathered bones with reverence. In some places, a small chapel was made of the memory of many. An ossuary where the light fell softly across white arrangements. Visitors lowered their voices without being asked, as one does in the presence of something holy and human and shared. What did the healers learn, one slow note at a time? That air matters, that space matters, that water matters, that clean streets help, that refuse must be carried away, that windows should be open to the morning when the weather allows, that keeping the sick separate from the well can protect both, and that care must be gentle and patient and kind, that when fear grows loud, wisdom must grow louder and speak in a steady tone. They learned to count, to notice when the fever began, when it ended, where it crossed the river, where it did not. They put a finger on the city's pulse, day after day, until the beat returned to normal. Boards of health met at regular hours and wrote orders in plain words. Bell ringers were told when to rest their arms and when to sound the rope. Public wells were inspected. Market stalls given wider aisles. Burying grounds moved beyond the last houses, where the wind could pass and the trees could breathe. You can breathe with the trees now, slowly and without effort. In, like leaves lifting. Out, like leaves settling. Not all remedies were soft. A long-nosed mask appeared in some later centuries, stuffed with herbs and flowers. The image is famous now, but the truth is simple and more ordinary. Most care was given by neighbours, by family, by clergy, by women who knew how to wash a brow, change linens, bring broth, keep a room aired and calm. These small acts, multiplied across thousands of rooms, were the quiet heroes of many seasons. When blame rose like smoke, there were also winds that cleared it. Preachers and elders stood in doorways and said, "This stranger is not your enemy. This rumour is not your friend." They asked people to choose mercy, to put down the stone, to light the lamp, to share the bread. Sometimes the better angels prevailed, and a town's story turned toward gentleness. Across faiths, prayers were said in different languages, but the hopes aligned. In synagogues, psalms rose with familiar cadences. In churches, litanies moved bead by bead. In mosques, voices flowed in unison, like water along carved channels. All asked for protection, for patience, for wisdom, for the strength to help one another. All asked to remember that the stranger at the gate is also a child of God, a bearer of grief, a holder of hope. When the first sorrow had passed, some rulers planted trees along roads, shade for travellers, fruit for the hungry, beauty for the tired eye. Bridges were mended, mile markers reset, wayhouses swept and newly whitewashed. Scribes were hired to copy the laws again, with amendments for hard lessons learned. Coiners struck pieces with steady hands, and balanced their scales where anyone could see. In schools, teachers told students to leave a margin in their notebooks, not only for corrections, but for additions, because knowledge grows and breathes and makes room for new understanding. A physician wrote in his own margin, "Observe before you conclude," and underlined it twice. Centuries passed, and a different kind of light entered rooms. Glass curved in small circles. Lenses found their focus on wooden stands. Hands stained slides with colour, and the very small came into view. The little rod that had ridden so far on fur and rope and breath showed itself, a name was given, and with the name, the first threads of remedy. Another doctor, years later, watched a flea on a rat and drew a thin line on a page, connecting points of a quiet constellation. Ships were inspected more carefully. Ports became vigilant. Bins were built to keep grain dry and high. When sparks appeared, they were seen and cooled. Let us widen the circle again. Beyond Europe, along shores of other seas, in the Maghreb, date palms swayed over courtyards where families gathered at dusk. In the Levant, traders looked from towers across a quieting harbour and counted the lanterns of returning boats. In Anatolia, travellers warmed their hands over braziers and told news from distant caravan towns. In the Red Sea ports, sailors listened to wind in rigging and recited verse to pass the night. The same patterns held. People cared for one another. Markets thinned and then thickened. Prayer mats were laid out and rolled again with gratitude. Chroniclers wrote, not to frighten, but to remember, so that those who came after could be wiser sooner. Now, come closer to the ground again, a pair of sandals by a doorway, dry from the day's sun, a pestle in a mortar, the smell of mint and sage, a two-handled cup on a shelf, clean and ready, a candle stub in a saucer, with drips like little tusks, a cat on a bench, watching, not judging, soft dust in a beam of light, turning slowly, like planets. Let it all be ordinary and dear. Let it all be enough. When children asked their grandparents about those years, the elders chose their words with care. They spoke of sorrow, and also of singing. They spoke of empty chairs, and also of weddings that filled benches again. They spoke of fields left quiet, and then green, and then gold. They spoke of hands that learned new skills, and neighbours who learned new names. They spoke of the time they put a bowl of soup on a windowsill for a passerby, and of the note that came back the next morning, tied with twine that simply said, "Thank you." If you are awake in the small hours, know that you are part of a long, unbroken watch. Bakers have always stood at the oven in the dark. Midwives have always waited with calm faces. Sailors have always kept the first and last light. Librarians have always turned a page softly. Night wardens have always walked the lane and touched the gate to feel it latched. You are in that company now, and you may lay your watch down whenever you wish. Someone else will lift it. They always have. And so, we fold this longer cloth over the first one, seam to seam, making a warmer blanket for the night. What the Black Death took, it also taught. It taught patience, and the value of air and space. It taught the worth of a single bowl of water, clean and cool. It taught the strength of quiet decisions made together, to wait 40 days, to move the market outside, to keep the sick and the well apart with love and not with shame. It taught that grief asks for gentleness, and that blame, though tempting, is poor medicine. We can linger longer, walking softer paths, adding more lamplight to the long corridor. Nothing we have spoken before will be disturbed. We are only laying gentle threads beside the earlier weave. On a hill above a river bend, a bell foundry glowed like a small sunrise at midnight. Men in leather aprons stared into the furnace, then looked away to blink and rest their eyes. A mold waited in the earth, shaped by hands that knew the weight of music. When the metal ran, it ran like honey made of stars. Later, the bell would hang in a tower, and the town would learn its new voice. It would mark harvest and weddings and quiet gatherings after rain. And in harder seasons, it would sound slow notes, measured and kind. A reminder that even sorrow is counted and shared. In a low house by a marsh, reeds whispered like old pages. A woman sorted herbs on a rough plank table, binding small bundles with twine, yarrow for wounds, mint for unsettled stomachs, rosemary for the pot and for remembrance. She knew the plants by smell, by texture, by the way they bent to her hand. Not all cures, no, not in those years, but many comforts, and comfort multiplied is a kind of healing. In a mountain town, snow filled the grooves of the main street like white mortar. The baker stepped into pre-dawn cold and felt the sky close to the ground. He laid logs, lit tinder, breathed on the flame. By dawn, the door was propped open with a smooth stone. Neighbors came in twos and threes, cheeks pink, eyes bright from the air. Coins clicked, cloth rustled. A bag of flour sighed as it settled. He wrapped each loaf in a square of linen, tied with a neat twist. Work like this steadies a village, one warm crumb at a time. If your mind wanders, let it wander where it will. It always comes back, like a cat returning to the warm place on the blanket. In a small chancery room behind a church porch, a clerk sharpened a quill against pumice. He turned a leaf of vellum and said a simple heading, Register of the Sick, modestly drawn. Under it, neat lines. A date, a street, a name, a note. This was not gloom, but attention. Attention is a form of love. When the page filled, he sanded it lightly, blew the grit away, and closed the book as if tucking a child to sleep. In a harbour warehouse, a steward chalked signs on crates. Hold, air, inspect. An hour's patience at a door can spare a year's grief inside. He leaned on the chalk for a moment, looked through the open double doors at the sunlight on the quay, and smiled at the thought of afternoon tea. Sometimes, the road itself teaches. A traveller walking from one parish to the next noticed where the ditch held water, and where it flowed. He saw how a little footbridge changed the path of shoes and cartwheels, how a gate kept animals from wandering into the well yard. He carried these thoughts like pebbles in his pocket. In the next town, he spoke to the reeve, and together they moved a trough, dug a small runnel, asked the children to play a little further from the pump. Nothing grand, yet the air felt cleaner by the next market day. Breathe in, like water over stones. Breathe out, like water finding level. Somewhere on a plain, tents rose in ordered rows. A lazarette grew like a careful garden, space between beds, open canvas flaps. A path swept with a straw broom each morning. A boy carried a bucket with both hands, proud of its weight. A woman set a cup by a patient's elbow, and waited, and did not hurry the sip. A man read a psalm under his breath, not aloud, simply to keep the time. In the ledger by the gate, a guard drew a small star on the day the fever broke in one tent, and then A week later, drew one more. Art and law met at a wooden table. A city's magistrates asked the painters for clear signs that could be seen from far away. One showed a hand with an open palm. Stop and wait. One showed a bird in flight. Air this room. One showed a circle and two small figures inside, not touching. Give each other space. They nailed the little boards to doors and posts. And somehow the streets felt more human, not less. Across winter fields, the line between town and land is a soft seam. A plough rests under a thatch lean-to. A spindle lies in a basket with wool like a small cloud. A child draws a circle in frost with a finger and laughs at the cold light. A crow, polite in its way, steps aside to let two walkers pass the hedgerow gap. Life is stubborn and gentle, and it returns. In a scriptorium later in the century, when the worst of the first wave belonged to memory, two scholars argued kindly. One loved Aristotle's clear steps. The other loved the sweetness of poetry. They agreed on one thing: write what is true, as far as you can know it. So they recorded numbers when they had them, and used tender words when they did not. They did not pretend certainty when it would have been a lie. Their honesty is a little lamp that still burns. If you are lying on your side, tuck a hand beneath your cheek. Notice where your body touches the bed. Each point of contact like a small harbour. Let the muscle behind your eyes soften, as if it too is exhaling. There were processions too, but with a better wisdom. Lanterns carried at a distance, songs sung softly, outdoors, spaces between families as wide as a wagon. Bread was left at thresholds, wrapped in cloth, with a sprig of rosemary tucked beneath the knot. A sign was chalked low on a door, to tell a neighbour all is well today. When all was not well, a different mark. And someone came to stand below the window and speak comfort up into the room. In some places, a bowl of vinegar stood on a windowsill with two clean cloths. Those who brought wood or water dipped and wrung the cloth and wiped their hands, and felt better for the ritual even when its science was thin. Rituals hold our fear and make it smaller. In the cool hours before sunrise, a shepherd heard something move in the grass and did not startle. He held still and listened, and understood it was only a fox, cautious and clever. He admired it for a breath, and then sent his dog quietly to turn it away. He thought about how problems are sometimes like that animal, quick and shy, and narrower than our fear. He smiled and leaned on his staff, and watched the eastern sky lightened by a shade. When the great academies came with their lenses and lights, centuries later, they did not grow from nothing. They grew from the careful clerks, the patient porters, the mothers with mint and sage, the stewards with chalk, the magistrates with little boards. They grew from the habit of attention, and from the choice to be kind while being careful. A doctor in a new white coat kept a sprig of rosemary pressed between 2 pages of an old book. She said it reminded her to remember those hands before hers, and to move gently through rooms where people are afraid. Listen now to a quiet street in summer. Leaves stir, somewhere a pigeon coos. Someone waters a step with a tin can, and the sound is like soft rain. A grandfather and a child sit on the stoop and count the horses that pass, even though there are only 2 in the whole town. They count them anyway, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. Counting, like prayer, can be a way of saying thank you for what returns. When futures reopened, they did so in small doors. A schoolhouse added a window, then another, then learned to hold class under a tree when the weather was generous. A midwife kept a book where she wrote the names of children born in the after. And sometimes she drew a tiny star next to a name when the mother had once been ill and had recovered. A mason set a new cornerstone and tapped it twice with the handle of his trowel, just for luck and for rhythm. There were songs, lullabies turned a little toward gratitude. Work songs counted blessings as well as beats. A ballad spoke of lovers who waited through a long season and married when the road opened. A hymn praised the spaces between people as much as the closeness, because both are needed and both can be loving. Now let us return for a moment to the sea. A galley moves under oars, slow and even. The coxswain calls a pace like a heartbeat. On the foredeck, a small shrine holds a bit of evergreen and a ribbon. The helmsman glances over the port quarter and sees a line of pale foam in the wake, neat as stitchwork. The captain's log is wedged under a coil of rope, and the last entry says only, "Hold offshore tonight and rest." Rest is seamanship too. And to a field, a woman kneels among beans and sets a small stake beside each plant. She ties a loose loop of twine, not tight, to let the living thing breathe. Clouds move like islands. A dog sighs in the shade. Later, she will carry a basket to the kitchen and set green things in a bowl of water to shine. Food again. Blessing again. In the city of books, where printers would one day set movable type and pull fresh words from a press, there was first a room with silence and dust motes. A librarian lifted a chain to free a volume and walked it carefully to a table for a young reader with ink on his fingers. The boy traced a capital with his eye, not his hand, and breathed as if at a window. Knowledge made a sound so small it could only be heard inside the chest. If wakefulness clings, you may make a small promise to your body. Say, "I will carry you kindly tomorrow." Say, "You did enough today." Say, "We can rest now." Then let your jaw soften again, and let your tongue rest heavy, and let your eyes melt toward dreams. When people later told the story of the Black Death to their grandchildren's grandchildren, they placed a hand on a knee and spoke slowly. They said, "We did not know, and then we knew." They said, "We were afraid, and then we were less afraid." They said, "We were unkind sometimes, and then we learned to be kinder." They said, "We lost much, and we found each other." And the child, hearing this, nodded with a seriousness beyond years, as children do, and then fell asleep on the storyteller's shoulder, warm and trusting. The night is far along now, and the map of the past has been folded and put away. The lamp burns low. The floor is cool. Outside, a fox passes down the lane without hurry. A cloud discovers the moon, and then the moon is free again. You may keep only one small line from this long telling. Attention is a form of love. Attention to breath, to water and air, to space and care, to neighbours and strangers, to the old pages, to the new day. Last whisper, close the gate, draw the latch softly, turn the key. The house holds you. History hums like a distant bell, kind and low. Sleep takes your hand and leads you into the garden beyond the garden, where every path is safe. Good night, dear traveller. Good night.